So this
Okay.
let it to be for the refuah of Leah Masha Basara, for Rebbetzin Leanne Cohen, and Kevin teach us.
Okay. So continuing with the theme of davening here, and this is from Halachapedia, so it's a legit site. It says here, okay, where to go to a minyan. So if one has the choice of going to a closer shul than a farther shul, one must choose the latter option, as one gets more reward for one's journey. But one must understand that it comes at the opportunity cost of Talmud Torah and could possibly entail Shmiras Einayim issues along the way. There's a principle that a person should be careful that he doesn't delay the congregation unnecessarily. This concept is called Tircha Tzibur. It also applies to the Shaliach Tzibur who is davening slowly, purposely to hear himself sing. Point 3, it is better to daven in a shul with a minyan than in a Beit Midrash without a minyan. It is better to daven in a shul with a minyan that is larger than a Beit Midrash with a smaller minyan because of Rof Am Chadrat Melech. That means with the multitude of people, the king is honored. Okay, so the more the merrier, if possible. I mean, if it's practical. Okay, coming early to minyan. It's a great script if you're part of the first 10 for the minyan. Okay. Have you got any more in another minute or two, or do you need me to finish?
I don't know. I think need you to finish Kevin's focus.
Okay, Gavin, are you ready?
Not yet.
Should I continue?
Yeah,
Another minute or two?
Yeah.
Okay, so what parts of davening require there to be a minyan? So, as we said the other day, Kaddish, Kedusha, Baruch Hu. You may not be said if there isn't a minyan present. If there is a minyan of 10 adult males, but at least 4 of them have davened, the congregation may still say Kaddish, Baruch Hu, and Kedusha. Well, that would be the Gabbai would check that he would decide that when to start the Chazarat Hashatz, the repetition, or to say Baruch Hu. That's okay. According to Halacha, it is permissible to start Chazarat Hashatz. That's the repetition, even if 4 people in the minyan are still davening the silent Shemona Israel. However, it's better to wait until there are 10 who are able to answer. Well, that means they've actually concluded the Shemona Israel. Okay. Another 2 points to add?
Yeah. I don't know if Kevin's.
He looks like he's ready. Okay, so that's just one more thing. What is considered davening in a minyan? And there's just another minute, less than a minute here. Point 1. Is davening Shemona Israel when the tzibur is davening a different Shemona Israel? Is that considered a tefillah b'tzibur? Many achronim, that is, according to many achronim, that is considered tefillah b'tzibur, while others may disagree. Point 2, someone from Chutz La'aretz who is davening weekday Shemona Israel with an Israeli minyan on the second day of Yom Tov is considered tefillah b'tzibur. In the opposite case, with an Israeli in the diaspora, davening weekday Shemona Israel with the congregation, davening Yom Tov Shemona Israel is a dispute. That is tefillah b'tzibur. But in that particular case, ask a Rov. Like when I was in South Africa in 2021, when I came out to help my dad, I was there for Shavuot. And in Israel, you only keep Shavuot one day. And I asked Aaron Zolberg, what do I do second day? Because I only keep one day. So in private, you can do malocha. So I actually worked that day. But when you're in public, you can't. You have to create the impression that you're observing the Chag. because that's that you're in a place that's outside Israel. So that's what I did. So I went out for dinner. It's actually quite funny. It's quite weird. I went out for dinner, or like second night, and then I came back and I walked home, and I didn't have my phone or anything on me, only obviously keys. And I came back and I checked my emails. I was allowed to.
So I
It was
wonder
in
what
private.
happens
Yeah.
when you've got a business in South Africa and you're living in Israel. Do you have to, for Marit Ayin, close the business, or not? Be interesting to know.
So the thing is with Shabbos and that if someone's business has to be open on the day
No,
of the
I
Shabbos.
don't mean that, because then in certain shopping centers, retail centers, you have to be open.
Then
and there's a
have to give
contract that you.
yes. Oh yeah, of course. You can't renege.
No, you can't renege. So people have sold the business on. There are ways to do it. I'm just saying.
Or give the money to tzedakah, the proceeds, or something like that. That's right. You can't.
There's a cake.
Okay, now I wanted Arthur to read it for a refuah for himself. Because I don't know if he got the clap or what. Arthur, you want to read it?
Yeah, okay. If one stole an animal and it aged, or hold on, I can't get your picture away from there. Hold on, Damon, on top of my screen. Okay, put you at the bottom. Okay, so I was saying, if one stole an animal and it aged, or a slave or slaves and they aged, he pays their cash value as of the time of the robbery. With Rav Meir says, with respect to slaves, the robber may say to the original owner, "Behold, what is yours is right here before you. Take it back as is." If one stole a coin and it cracked, or fruits and they rotted, or wine and it soured, he pays the value at the time of the robbery. If, however, one stole a coin and it became disqualified, or teruma and it became tamai, or chomet and Pesach passed it by while it was in the robber's possession, or an animal and a transgression was performed with it, or it became disqualified from being offered on the temple altar, or it was going out to be stoned, the robber may say to the original owner, "Behold, what is yours is right here before you. Take it back as is."
Okay, so let's just analyze this a bit. I'm going to ask you guys a question. If one stole an animal and it aged, or slaves and they're aged, he pays their cash value as of the time of the robbery. Why? Kev, why?
Okay.
I haven't asked Kevin.
No, that's because that's the value. That's what the owner wouldn't be out of pocket.
Well, why doesn't he just return the animal or the slave? Kev?
Well,
maybe there've been
No,
some. The animal may have given birth, or maybe there was a fetus then, or maybe some changes were made. It's different to what it was at the time of the robbery. So
okay,
the value has changed.
Read the first sentence, Kev.
And it aged.
Yes.
Then it loses its value.
And therefore?
Therefore, the owner will be out of pocket. So the robber must compensate him for the full value, the value at the time of the theft.
Excellent.
Not what it's worth at the current stage when it aged, because then he's going to lose money.
Excellent. That's a perfect answer. Arthur, I know you've done Rabbi Cohen. I was just checking. So, Kevin, that's exactly the right answer. Is the reason why the animal isn't returned or the slave is returned in lieu of payment of what he stole, because a robber doesn't have to pay a twofold, fourfold, or fivefold, is simply because when the animal slave aged, there was a depreciation where the original owner, and it's a permanent depreciation, it's not a reversible change. So therefore, depreciated, and why should the original owner have money? if the court finds the slave 5 years on, and somebody said, "Hey, didn't you belong to Shimon? But why are you with Reuven? No, he kidnapped me." So that's exactly why the cash value is paid at the time of the robbery to give restitution to the original owner. Excellent. Now, I want to ask you, Kevin, I want to ask you, Gavin, with respect to slaves, the robber may say to the original owner, according to Rabbi Meir, "Behold, what is yours is right here before you. Take it back as it is." How can he say that according to Rabbi Meir?
I didn't hear that last part. What did you say?
Rabbi Meir has a statement and says, with respect to slaves, the robber may say to the original owner, "Behold, what is yours is right here before you. Take it back as it is." Why can he say that?
But then you asked another question. Why do we say? I didn't hear that part.
Yeah.
So let me just think. No, I do know it. Let me just think.
Okay.
So, because you can say that because a slave is considered like it's like land in essence. It's you can't really in essence it's considered more like an immovable property as opposed to movable property. And
good. And therefore,
and a slave. So a slave in theory should be able to come back and you should be able to return the robber, should be able to return the slave and get his money back, but you can't do it with the slave.
Correct, because the slave, as you said, is like land. But what's the issue with land?
So with land is land can't change ownership.
Yes, well, on the more practical.
No, it can, but not like this. You can't steal land to change ownership. And yeah, if you take you can't take ownership of that slave.
That's an excellent answer. In other words, what Gavin is saying is that you might be able to steal the title deed for land, but you can't put land in your pocket, situated where it is. You can't really go get away with it. I mean, whatever you can use on the land, you either practically have possession or you don't, but it doesn't mean you own the land. It's immovable. So therefore, a slave, if it's seen legally as land, the robber can say, what do you mean? It deteriorated. I never took what was yours. I might have had it in my possession, but it was truly still yours legally, like land. I couldn't have put it in my pocket and run away. Exactly. Gavin well answered. Kevin well answered. Now, Arthur, I'm going to ask you a question. If one stole a coin and it cracked, or fruits and they rotted, or wine and it's out, he pays the value at the time of the robbery. Okay? Now that...
Yeah. Guys, I just got to go collect the package. Can you give us a 1 minute break? I won't be long. Sorry, I'm so sorry, guys.
Sure. But Arthur can answer.
Okay, carry on, yeah.
So if one stole a coin and it cracked, or fruits and they rotted, or wine and they soured, he pays the value as of the time of the robbery. Why?
Well, it's in the statement. You can't sell a rotten thing because if something goes rotten, that's worthless.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So it's dealing with, Arthur's correct. It's dealing with the same issue of depreciation. So why should the original owner get something that has deteriorated? Is entitled to get the value back at the time when it was of prime value, at the time of the robbery before it deteriorated. That's excellent. Now,
and back to slavery, by the way, Dan, is about the slave.
Yeah.
One thing I learned when you were learning earlier, you remember with the guy he was a guy that made clothing, and he lost his arm, and he actually had to sell him at the value of what he was. So if a guy is 20 years old, okay, he's worth a lot more than when he's 30, and as he gets older, from that time when you get it back, is the value is less. So if you buy a slave of 20, you're going to pay much more than a guy of 30.
Yeah, I think the way Arthur and I and Gavin are feeling, Kevin's the healthiest of the group. I think you'd get a shawarma between us if you put us all in the same
Half a shawarma, Damon, half if you like it. It's more like a falafel.
Yeah, exactly. So that's true. That's true. Now, I'm going to ask the last question. when Gavin gets back. Well, I can ask it. I can ask it now.
Okay.
If, however, one stole a coin and it became disqualified, or Teruma and it became Tameh, or Chametz and Pesach passed over it while in the robber's possession, when animal and a transgression was performed with it, or it became disqualified for being offered on the temple altar, it was going out to be stoned. The robber may say to the original owner, behold, what is yours is right before you, take it back as it is. So guys, what I wanted to ask is as follows. If the animal in these cases has deteriorated, how can the robber say to the original owner, you can take it back as is, and let the original owner suffer the loss?
Okay, because I think I kind of answer. It's because one is
Hang on,
one
I
is a
just want to
physical.
repeat the question for Gavin. Gav, are you
back?
back? So Arthur answered it perfectly. What he said is when we were discussing fruits that rotted or stole a coin and it cracked, and all of these issues are wine and it's soured, the reason why he pays back at the time of the robbery is because just like an animal that aged, as Kevin said, there's deterioration in these other cases. So obviously the original owner doesn't lose out. It's not his fault that in the robber's possession it went south and lost value. So in that particular case, the original owner is given restitution as the time of the robbery when it was worth its full value. Now, the question that I asked Arthur, if he knew, is why in the other cases that come up on your screen, is it not that way? So, for example, let's not say you stole a coin and it cracked, because then it's the robber has to pay the cash value at the time of the robbery, and he gets to keep the cracked coin. But say it became disqualified, that currency became disqualified, or it lost value, Gavin. Or teruma and it became tama. You've got something pure and it becomes something you can't use. Or chametz and Pesach passed it while in the robber's possession, which means no Jew can use it then. The robber's Jewish. An animal and a transgression was performed with it. Okay? Meaning you can't get hanua. You cannot get hanua, which is benefit from the animal. Or it became disqualified from a offering on the temple altar, or it's going to go out to be stoned. So Gavin, why in this case, I'm asking Arthur, because he does his homework, behold what is yours before you take it back as it is. So why in this case can the robber say to the original owner, listen, take it back in the depreciated state? It's your problem.
Okay, so the first one, let's go back to the last one. The one before that's actually a physical change, and the one you're talking about now is actually a spiritual change. He could still sell it to a goyim.
Excellent.
His money back.
Excellent. So, Arthur, I just want everybody to see who you're on the screen, to know people that do excellent work. So he learned from Rabbi Cohen. So do you remember there was the daf in the very beginning? I think it was between the third and the fifth daf, where we dealt with Rav Oshia and Rav Chia. Remember before we were talking about damages? Remember, guys, in the very beginning of Bava Kamma.
Well, not to the level you remember, but we have an idea.
Okay, so what we basically said there is that what you're dealing with there is that at the end of the day, you're dealing with a case where there's no discernible physical damage. Okay, if you look at the disqualified coin, it's a concept, guys. Money's just a concept. It's lost value. So if you now stole, if you stole $1 from me on the 24th of March last year, and you stole $100 from me on the 24th of March last year, and now all of a sudden there's a court date. And you give it back to me at that sort of value. Now, it appreciated. It appreciated. But in other currencies, it depreciates. So the thing of it is, if it depreciated, it's not a discernible damage to the actual physical product of money. One of the definitions is that the reason why the robber acquires the object and has to pay the cash equivalent is because it's not recognizable physically from the item he stole. He has to return that which he stole. So if it's physically recognizable, he can return it to the original owner. If it's not, he keeps the article, whether it's appreciation or depreciation, and pays the cash value at the time of the robbery. So Arthur said the answer perfectly. Basically, if there was no discernible change and the currency took a dive, that's a concept. The currency could be a crisp 10 Rand note. It's worth nothing now compared to 2 years ago. Doesn't matter if he kept it in pristine condition, but that's not the robber's fault, because the only reason he has to keep an item is if it's not rendered in the same physical state that it was stolen. And Arthur's right in terms of spiritual concept, perfect, is that if you have something that was permissible to have, teruma, and it became tame, well, again, if you sold it to a non-Jew, then there's no difference. It still looks like the same item, by the way. If you look at wine and it's soured, then it's depreciated in terms of the qualitative nature. But if the wine becomes treif, or it's not mavashah and a goy touches it and you can't drink it as a yid, it's lost perceptive value. And it might be worthless, by the way. It might be a very real thing that it's worthless. But the physical quality of the wine has not deteriorated in any way. And so too with the other examples of Pesach. You got whiskey and you let it pass through Pesach and you can't derive any future benefit from it. The whiskey hasn't become less quality based. It's still Shevis Regal. And it's the same thing when you're dealing with all these other cases that animals become disqualified on the altar. It's going to get stoned because somebody had an act of bestiality with it, etc. The original animal remains physically intact, and therefore, if it hasn't physically changed, the robber can return the item that he stole, much to the detriment of the original owner in terms of value. So that's something that you've just got to bear in mind. Okay, so if you have a look, the Gemara basically defines the first ruling that aging constitutes a change that affects acquisition. Rav Papa said, when the Mishnah mentions that the animal aged, it doesn't mean that the animal, guys, is considered to have changed only if it actually aged. This is what Rav Papa is saying now. He's saying if it merely became lean without aging, the animal is considered changed. Now, we learned before that if the animal becomes lean, it's not a permanent change. It's a reversible change if you feed the animal. And it's only rabbinically that the robber would acquire it in certain cases, but biblically certainly not. It's to aid is to sugar, but not everybody would agree with that rabbinical opinion. So what are we saying? That if it became lean, it's considered as if it's a permanent deterioration? We're talking about a case where the animal became lean through a sickness. Do you get what I'm saying? So for which there's no cure. So then you're not going to restore the animal back to the health, even though it hasn't aged a lick. It might have just become sick in the last month or two and it hasn't physically aged. But any sort of permanent change of loss of weight due to sickness that can't be remedied is considered as if it's aged. So in fact, becoming lean also constitutes a change, and the reason the Mishnah mentions it aged, inverted commas, is to teach that if it became lean, this constitutes a change only in the case that is similar to it having aged. In the animal of this nature that's sick will never return to its original health. So the bottom line is any deterioration where the animal is not recognizable from before, the robber gets to keep the deteriorated animal and provides restitution to the original owner at the value of the time of the robbery. So, Rav Kishish the son of Rav Chisda, said to Rav Ashi, this is what they meant to say in the name of Rav Yochanan. Even if one stole a lamb and it matured into a ram, or if he stole a calf and it matured into an ox, it has undergone a physical change in his possession, and he slaughters it and he thereby acquires it. So guys, then we learned last Mishnah towards the end. If he slaughters or sells it, he's not liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment, for it's his animal that he's slaughtering and it's his animal that he's selling. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's the same thing then, except the animal appreciated a bit in value by going through puberty, but isn't the same animal he stole. So there's no liability to the four or fivefold payment. If it's a robber, he just has to return the cash equivalent. If it's a theft, he does have to pay the kanas. He does have to pay double, by the way, in that case. But he's not liable for the four or fivefold payment because that has to be recognizable to the original item. And Rav Ashi said to Mar Kashisha, have I not said to you, do not change names of people when you attribute a ruling? That ruling was stated in the name of Rav Ilah. So the Gemara is saying this because Rav Ashi agrees with Mar Kashisha's basic point, meaning the only point that he doesn't like is the fact that he didn't quote the rabbi that he heard it from. And we've got a clear tradition that whenever you hear something, it should be in the name of the person that gave it over. So he obviously heard it over differently. So the Gemara cites the clause that reads, Rabbi Meir says with respect to slaves, the robber may say to the original owner, behold, what is yours is right here before you, take it back as it is. So the Gemara rules, Rav Chanina Bar Avdimi said in the name of Rav, the halacha accords with Rabbi Meir that slaves are treated as land and cannot legally be stolen. Okay? So the Gemara asks, but does Rav then abandon the opinion of the rabbis and rule in practice in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir? So what the Gemara is asking is that why would Rav go for the minority of opinion, even for the great Rabbi Meir, when his colleagues of that generation were of the general opinion, a rabbinical opinion, that basically slaves are treated as movables. So it would. So then it's not knocking Rabbi Meir. It says that why aren't you going with the majority of the opinion? Because consensus does count. One person doesn't make a minyan, so they generally go with consensus. So the Gemara answers, they said, because a Brisa taught the opinions of Rabbi Meir and the rabbis in the opposite way. We learned that last time, guys, that you could have learned it either way. There's some rabbis that reverse the opinion and state that Rabbi Meir holds that one pays for stolen slaves who have aged according to the time of the robbery, whereas the sages say that the robber returns the aged slave and says what is yours is before you. So when Rav stated the halacha accords with Rabbi Meir's ruling in the Mishnah, he was actually ruling in accordance with the opinion of the sages. He didn't actually say Rabbi Meir. He was just talking about the opinion that slaves are seen as land, and that's why they can be returned to the original owner. And we learned that there are opinions that say that the rabbis treated slaves as land, and Rabbi Meir treated slaves as immovable, and there are opinions that say Rabbi Meir treated slaves as land and the rabbis as movables. So in that particular case, it depends how you rule. So Rav would go with majority. So then there's a problem. And what's the problem? Because does Rav abandon the version of the disputed recorded Mishnah and rule in practice in accordance with the version of the disputed Brisa? So the Mishnah we learned is that Rabbi Meir says that slaves are like land and the rabbis say it's like movables. It was the Brisa, guys, we learned afterwards that reverses the opinions and says that slaves are treated according to Rabbi Meir as movables and the rabbis according to the slave according to land. But when the whole question that the Gemara brings up is when would you choose the Brisa's opinion over a Mishnah? Because a Mishnah is much more important than a Brisa. So Rav also teaches the Mishnah in the opposite way, meaning that the Gemara guys understood the answer to mean that Rav reversed the text of the Mishnah so it could conform with the text of the Brisa. And the Gemara says, well, that's a bit puzzling. Because why would Rav reverse the text of the Mishnah in face of the opposite text found in the Brisa? It doesn't make sense. On the contrary, you should generally reverse the text of the Brisa in the face of the opposite text found in the Mishnah, because the Mishnah is more important. So if you're having a contradiction, the Mishnah should take precedence. Why would Rav reverse the text of the Brisa? The Gemara answers, they say Rav has also taught the Mishnah in the opposite way, meaning he didn't amend the Mishnah at all. Rather, his teachers taught him the Mishnah as having the version of the dispute found in the Brisa. Does that make sense? There's also an alternative answer, and that is if you prefer to say, in fact, Rav's Mishnaic text reads the same as us, and Rav actually reversed the opinions. Why? Because there's a principle. He won't reverse the text of a Mishnah in favor of the text of the Brisa, because a Mishnah is stronger. So if it would involve amending one Mishnah in the face of an opposite text found in one Brisa, the Mishnah trumps. Mishnah wins. But if there are two Brisas in one Mishnah, two Brisas trump a Mishnah, and then he can reverse the opinion based on the Mishnah. And how do we know there's a second Brisa? We only ever learned one. Because there's a separate Brisa about exchanging a cow for a donkey. Okay? In other words, and the cow gave birth. So what is this actual case? So, all right. Reuven owns a cow and Shimon owns a donkey. And they agree to exchange the animals. So you can accomplish it through a method of acquisition called chalifin. Okay, so that's termed mainly as an exchange or a barter. Now, it's in Kedushin 28a and b if you want to see the sourcing. So guys, when the barter method is employed, it's been agreed that one object is to be exchanged for another. The physical transfer of one object suffices to complete the transaction. Legally, that's all you need is to grab on the one object. You don't have to grab them both at the same time. Because the second object is automatically acquired by its new owner as well. So, it follows that the second object doesn't have to be present when the kinyan is performed. But it can create certain uncertainties. One of them being, in our case, that Reuven effects the exchange by drawing the donkey towards himself. So it's an act of mashicha, where you're drawing the animal. And that transferred ownership of the donkey to Reuven, but it also caused Shimon gain ownership of the cow, which was located elsewhere at the time on his farm. But there's a problem, because later it was discovered that the cow had given birth around the same time as Chalifin. But it's unclear whether the birth occurred before the exchange took place, in which case, guys, the calf would belong to Reuven, right? Who still owned the cow at the time it gave birth. Or whether the birth occurred afterwards, in the case the calf would belong to Shimon, who had already acquired the cow at the time that it gave birth. Do you see the question? Kev, you see. If you're not sure, ask me.
Just repeat the question there, yeah.
Okay, so there's two different things. The normal way to do it is a seller and a buyer. Another way is a barter system, where we swap objects. But when you swap objects, there's something known as chalifin, okay, which is either an exchange or a barter. Now, what happens is you have to have something, it says in Kedushin 28a and b, of something called mashicha, which means you draw the animal you want towards you. So when you make a declaration of exchange and then you physically draw the animal towards you, implicit in the fact that you're taking the one item is that you've bartered the other. And you don't need both items there physically to exchange hands. It's not a drug deal, guys, where the one guy's got a weapon and the one guy's got drugs and cash. and you see them exchanging quickly the cash and the drugs before there's a shootout. You know what I mean? It's not like that. The cow's busy grazing on one farm, and then he comes past. He said, "I like your donkey. You've already seen my cow. Let's do the exchange." And it's done. All he has to do is grab the donkey. They have to agree, and he pulls the donkey, and then he gets the cow. In this particular case, Kevin, there's a problem because the cow gave birth. Now, there's a legal case because the person that bought the donkey for the cow said it gave birth after he got ownership of the cow, and therefore the cow belongs to the person, to Reuven. Whereas Shimon, who exchanged his donkey for the cows, turns around and says, "Listen, it actually gave birth before we did the swap. The calf is mine. The cow, he gets for the donkey, but I would never have given him both the cow and the fetus and the calf. That's for sure." So that's where they got a legal dispute because they never exchanged it at the same place. You get what I'm saying. So that's the other brisa that we're talking about. Now, in terms of how it affects, what does this have to do with our case? Go through it. And similarly, if one sells his Canaanite slave woman and she gives birth. So we're going to go through the whole issue with that. I've got Rav Schottenstein in 15 minutes. I think we can call it a break now. Arthur's exhausted. I'm slightly finished. And with the link that Kevin did, we've covered the full 40 minutes. I don't want to do the extra 9 minutes.
Just one question, Damon. So the Kinyan, you're saying the Kinyan, the time of the Kinyans is very important. Depending on if the cow may have had a fetus in it, and or it gave birth.
Yeah.
When it gives birth. So who does the calf belong to? That's the thing.
That's
what you said.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because the person that swapped the donkey said he got the cow, and he's got the calf because it gave birth under his. It had already been transferred. Whereas the person that swapped the donkey said, "There's no ways I would give a cow and a calf in exchange for the donkey. The mass doesn't add up." So then it goes to court, obviously. So we'll discuss that. All right, guys, have a good evening. And
thanks.
Nice to see you.
Thanks, Damon. Thanks, guys.
Sure.